Yes. I don't want the acorn and not just.
Erev Tov to everybody. I don't know, I feel we're in a kind of holding pattern, a bit like the plane going round and round, trying to find somewhere to land. So we're still waiting to see what's going to be, whether we're going to be back in the Mamadim or not. We'll have to see. I hope, please God, that things will, settle down properly. But Kol B'dei Shemayim. In terms of what we're doing this evening, we're looking at chapters 21 and 22. One of the commentaries that I use quite regularly, I found him. In fact, my wife's uncle introduced me to the book. It's a gentleman who teaches in up north in a place called. Actually, it's Moshav Nov. It's interesting because we're going to talk about Nov today. There's a school there, and he is a teacher. There has been a teacher there for quite a number of years. Yigal Ariel. He's a very interesting guy. I haven't met him, but we almost met him. We were up there, and there's Simmerim up there, so we were there a few years ago. But I didn't get a chance to say hello to him, but I hope I will. And he says quite plainly that chapter 21, 22 that we're going to tonight is a turning point. It's a very much a turning point in the story. I suppose every chapter is a turning point, but this, as you will see, things get particularly difficult for David, and certainly for Shaul. There's a lot of stuff going on. I wanted to say that we're going to be introduced to a character that is very perplexing. A gentleman called Doeg, if you've never heard of him. He's a really, unfortunately, when one thinks of some of the politicians in the Knesset today, he fills all the, as you say in America, he checks all the boxes. Head of Sanhedrin, very learned guy, and absolutely not a nice person. And I don't know how that summarizes so many people, but it really is a problem. But I think one can call him the politician unfortunately, more in the negative than the positive sense. And we're going to have to deal with him. And Doeg, by definition, is one of the guys who absolutely cannot stand the presence of David. It's quite extraordinary. And you think you'd have a David HaMelech amongst you, and this guy goes out of his way, absolutely out of his way, to try and bring David's reputation into disrepute. It's really quite extraordinary. So Doeg is a character that we're going to have to come to terms with. There's also a general subject which I was thinking about. I just saw recently online they've been putting up a lot of the original films of the Eichmann trial, 1962. So it's quite a long time ago. And a lot of the defense that Eichmann used, Yimach Shemo V'Zichro, was that I was only following orders. And this, of course, did not, in the end, save his skin. And, the man was despicable beyond belief and all the rest of it. But this becomes a very interesting discussion in this particular chapter that we're going to learn, or the two chapters I think we're going to get through. I was only following orders. Is that ever going to be an excuse? And in our world, obviously, I think the answer is no. But this concept, as you will see, becomes relevant in these particular chapters. So let's make a start. I hope we'll get through two chapters because the whole story really goes together, and it's about a place called Nov. Nov was not, I don't think where Nov is, as I said today, it's right up in the Galil, really in the Golan, actually. It's really higher than that. This Nov, I think, was very much closer to Shalim. It was a place where Kohanim lived, and they actually seem to have been the only people living there, right? There's this wonderful halachic debate about what do you do for duchening if there are only Kohanim in the town. It can become a little bit complicated. There is a halachic discussion about it. But the story, as you will see, is very, very shocking. David is running for his life. Remember last time he had this very, very emotional farewell with Yonatan. It really was terribly sad because they both are so close to each other, and yet at the same time, what they do in terms of loyalties is understandable, but it's very sad. Yonatan, by definition, made a decision to be more loyal to his father than to his friend David. And I get that. I understand that. His father, obviously, he really, as you will say today, he thought the world of his father, but at the same time, he understood his father's limitation. David, on the other hand, was someone that he had the same aspiration. We spoke about that. They were both very spiritual in their outlook, Hafta l'recha kamocha, they loved each other in a way, enjoying the success of the other person more than their own success. We spoke about this last time. So listen to this. And this chapter, these two chapters, 2 Parakim, 21 and 22, are just so difficult. Not a chapter, not a story that I enjoy teaching at any time, but it's there, and I think we can certainly come to know it, even though it's not going to be one of our favorite stories. Pretty guaranteed on that. Listen to this, chapter 21. David went off in one direction, and Yonatan went back to the city. So that was it. They split, and you'll see almost to the point where they do actually meet up once more, and that's it. They don't come together really again in any significant way because Yonatan has pledged his allegiance to his father. David Noiva. So David comes to a place called Nov. El Achimelech HaKohen. There's a Kohen there called Achimelech. Some say it was the Kohen Gadol. And what happened? V'yecherad Achimelech. Hi, good evening. Hi. Grab a seat. V'yecherad Achimelech likrat David. At this point, Achimelech, David's reputation was doing the rounds. And doing the rounds means that he was a pretty awesome, kind of a frightening sort of character. I mean, you think about it, it doesn't make sense. Here's the guy who wrote Tehillim, who is the ultimate, as I always used to explain, the sort of the Kalbachian to beat all the Kalbach. And yet at the same time, when he turns up at the city of the Kohanim, they are petrified of him. So it's obviously his warlike reputation is really, really significant. So Achimelech sees David, and Vayecharad, comes from the word Charid. We use the word Charidi today, but it means to fear, to tremble. And he says to him, so Achimelech said, why are you alone? There's nobody with you. What are you doing here, David? Why are you, what's going on? Obviously understanding that David was running for his life. So, Vayomer David Achimelech HaKohen. So David responds, HaMelech tzivani davar. This is something we've seen a number of times. This is called the white lie, right? Or as I prefer to translate it, being economical with the truth. What it means is that David, he's making up a bit of a story, but the story is being said in order to literally protect his life, right? Because again, he can't tell the truth to Achimelech because this would produce a situation where Achimelech might very well say, I need to be more loyal to the king than I do to David. And that would be a big problem for David. They might even hold him in a holding cell till Shaul turns up. So he says the following. He says, Pasuk Gimel. I'm on the mission from the king. And the king said to me, Ish al yedam uma, don't tell anybody what you're doing. Et hadavar she'anochi sholecha, where I'm sending you, and what I've commanded you. It's a secret mission. Fine, right? It really wasn't, but this is what David's excuse was. That's anarim yodati el makom ploni almoni. And he says that what I've done is my lads who are with me, they're in a place of ploni almoni. So interesting to me because Shabbat, I'm talking a bit about Megillat Ruth at the end, and who is one of the characters at the end? Ploni almoni. So this phrase pops up in Tanakh, at least in two places now I know, this over here and in the book of Ruth. And the Mefarshim say in both cases, Ploni almoni means it's a place where either we do not know where it is, or more to the point, it's something almon which should be kept quiet about, which is essentially what happens in the book of Ruth with the guy who's meant to marry Ruth, and he says, I don't want to marry her, and that's the whole story over there, and he's called Ploni almoni. We do know his real name, but he's not given the real name in the book of Ruth. It's something where because of what he said or what he did, or whatever happened, his name, his everything about him is going to remain in secret, in hiding. And I guess he deserved it, as you'll see if you come in here on Shabbat. Dalet. Now what happened was that David is starving. He's running away. He's obviously going to Nov outside Yerushalayim. And it turns out that not only is David not alone, he's got his lads, but he's got a whole group of people that he's responsible to feed. So he says, do you have 5 loaves of bread? He seems to have been aware that this is obviously the bread which the Kohanim would have had. Now the question is, was it regular bread? Are we talking about the specific, what is called lechev hapanim, the show bread? If you haven't done it, there's a wonderful gentleman called Jeff Seidel. You probably know him, some of you, who has this bakery at home in Karnei Shomron. Am I right? Karnei Shomron. And he does a demonstration showing you how he has worked out how the lechem hapanim managed to remain U-shaped. Because if you bake a loaf of bread with two, it goes like a U. So the bottom bit stays the way it is, but how do you keep the sides from collapsing? And he's found the whole recipe for doing it. He makes the lechem hapanim while you're sitting there, and by the time you've finished, you've had so much bread that all I would say is take some Tums or some sort of indigestion tablet with you, because boy, it was on the Richter scale, the indigestion at that time. But it's worth it. It's really a very wonderful experience to go and see him. He's a South African, right? Very, very, and he's brought out Sefer is very, very good. Yeah, and it's great. If you want to take, you go through Modini Lit on that road over there. I suppose 45 minutes, something like that. It's not that far.
And then he gives a talk there as well.
And he explains everything along the way. Yeah, so.
At the end of it, he gets the kids to dress up in
kids meaning big kids as well as little kids. Well, and my son, who's at the age of 40, loved dressing up. So what could I say? He's very American, my son. So it's really something. If you want to see this in live Technicolor, as they say, then that's the thing to do. So again, back to David, the lechem upon it. Possibly, or he said, whatever you have, animsa, or whatever to be found. In other words, if you haven't got the 5 loaves, give me whatever you have, right? And number 5, a lot of the rabbis play on the number, what exactly he's referring to. 5 loaves, some say just he wanted enough bread to last for a couple of days. Again, various, 1 loaf per day for at least to get through to the next Shabbat. All different suggestions. What did the Kohen do? Vayan Kohen et David vayomer ein lechem chol el tachat yadi. In other words, if you want regular whatever bread you want to refer to here, the stuff that you buy in the supermarket, what we used to call in America Arnold's, right, or whatever it's called here. All the bread is Pat Yisrael, but in America they rely on heterim. They have this other bread which a lot of people use. Kiim lechem kodesh. I've got holy bread, right, which is it's Kohanim, for goodness sake. What do you expect? Im nishmu anarim achmisha. But if you eat it, you've got to be holy. So have the men that you're taking it for been away from their wives? In other words, are they in a state of purity? Are they in a state where they haven't become tameh through having relations with their wives or any other of the tumas that would disqualify them from eating the bread? So Vayan David et HaKohen Vayomer. So David responded, Ki misha tzura lanu kitmol shel. There's been no women, right? In case you were worried, this is like what magazine is it? The Ami or whatever. No Mishpacha magazine, no pictures of women. There's no women in the thing whatsoever. But Seiti, when I came out, Vayu klei anarim kodesh, and all their vessels are holy. In other words, everything was dunked in the mikveh properly. Vahu derech chol, and what he says, this is something which is common. Va'avki ayom mikdash bekeli, and we even did making things purified today. Now, is this true or not? We have to take David at face value that for the purposes of getting the food, getting the bread, this was what he told him. Now, again, is David pushing the envelope here? Are we seeing a side of him where he seems to be able to come up with a story? Again, we saw this before. We saw this number, in a different example maybe of this. It's challenging. I don't know. I think the answer is that David is going to claim, very interestingly, that he is suffering from hunger pangs, and he hasn't eaten. He's been running from Yerushalayim. He's running away from King Saul, wherever Shaul was on the place where his palace was. And at this point, David needs some food. He's really, really hungry, and he needs to feed his men as well. So the Kohen said, Kohen did it. Vayitenu Kohen kodesh. He gave him the holy food, the holy bread. Ki lo hayasham lechem ki im lechem aponim osarim v'nei Hashem. This was the bread. They used to bake it on a Friday, and they used to put it on the shulchan, on the table in the temple on a Shabbat. And then the next Shabbat, they would take the incense, which was in a spoon next to the bread, pour it onto the altar, and then after, or maybe onto the bread, I don't remember now, but it's what they used to do, a special ceremony, and then the bread was taken off the table and new bread was put on the table. And the miracle took place that the bread never got stale. It was there a whole week, and it was steaming hot the whole week, one of the miracles of the temple. So basically, at this point, this was the bread that had been removed, was now consecrated to the point where it could be given to the to David and to whoever he was getting the bread for. And it says, "L'sum lechem chom b'yom ilakho," and it had been hot when they took it off the table, and now it was ready to eat. And Achimelech was doing the right thing to give it to David. All the commentaries asked the question, why didn't Yonatan at least give him a sandwich or something? Yonatan ran away, right? And David was one direction, Yonatan goes the other direction. He didn't give him any food. So they suggest that this is maybe something where Yonatan may not have necessarily behaved the way he should have done. There's a little bit of critique. You see at the end of this story, they critique Yonatan for that. I don't know if I would, because at the end of the day, they realized time was of the essence. And if they didn't get out of there quickly, it's going to be trouble, because Shaul is on his way to capture David. So I don't know. It's one of those questions that I can't really answer. But listen to this. Pasuk Chet. V'sham ish me'avdei, and here comes the problem. In the place of the Kohanim, there was a servant of Shaul, B'yomahu, on that day, Netzar Lifnei Hashem, who was there. It says detained, but it means that he went there to study. Ushemo Doeg Edomi. Doeg the Edomite. The Edomite, literally, Edom is south of Israel, so today's Saudi Arabia. And he was a Jew who came from Edom. Some say he converted, some say he was Jewish, born Jewish, and he came to live in Israel, and he became very close to Shaul. Almost to the point where the suggestion is, although there's nothing in the verse to say that he was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was a very learned guy, which again begs the question, someone with so much Torah and with so much learning, how could he do what he does? As you'll see, there's a very serious problem with this Doeg Edomi. We had a reference to him previously when David was playing for the king, Doeg apparently was the one who started the conversation. He plays so beautifully, and he does this, and he does that. Give a whole list of praises for David. But of course, he was trying to create jealousy. The rabbis say that was already Doeg showing that he doesn't like David. Why doesn't he like David? And this, again, is bound up with the story of the book of Ruth, because he doesn't think David is Jewish. He doesn't accept that the conversion that Ruth made, because she's a Moabite, and the Torah does not allow Moabites to become Jewish, although we say the men were forbidden, the women were allowed. The reality was, according to Doeg and his understanding of that particular commentary, Parish, whatever you want to call it, he felt that David was not Jewish. Now again, was Doeg l'shem shamayim, or was Doeg really somebody who was in it for the power, for the trip? And we'll see. We'll come to that, and maybe we'll make a decision on that by the time we finish. But he's certainly not this, how should we say, he's not warm and fuzzy. He's not the sort of guy that you really want to have much to do with. He's in the town, and he's come to study. So this is already a positive thing. He was the head shepherd. So say, Rabbi said, what, he was a shepherd? No, he was much more than that. So it means that he was shepherding the people, meaning that he was in charge. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. Strange way of describing him. It seems that he was someone that the people followed like sheep. Okay, sometimes leaders have that effect on people, as we know. Pasuk Tet. So David says, "Ve'in yesh bo tachat yadcha chanit ochar." Hello, good evening. Hi, come sit down. So David said, "Wait a minute. If I'm already here, I need a sword. I need something to fight with." Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting, because this is what I did not expect. The sword, the law of Tumah of a sword, is like the law of a dead body, right? The rabbis explain that. So what this sword was doing, and it had been used to cut off the head of Goliath. It was Goliath's sword. What it was doing in the town of the Kohanim is a question I haven't got a good answer for. But you can see that they put it away at the side. In yeshbo tachas yadcha chanit ocheret, you at least have a weapon, like a spear or a sword. Ki gam charbi v'gam kelai lo lakachti biyadi. I didn't take my own weapons. Ki hayad v'amelech nachutz, because the king sent me on this mission very, very urgently. So I didn't have time to take my weapons. Of course, not true. What he actually had to do is to run away for his life and he didn't have a chance even to take his sword. So reality is he needs a weapon. So look what happens there. And Achimelech is behaving like, the only way I can describe it is like a real mensch. Vayomer HaKohen, Cherev Goliath HaPlishti. You're in luck, David, because you know this sword, because you used it. It's the sword of Goliath. Asher Kita Ba'emek Ha'ela, the Emek Ha'ela, not far from it. You killed him. He luta b'simla acharei ephod. The ephod, the special cloak of the priest, is hanging in the closet over there, and behind it, wrapped in a whatever cloth it was wrapped in, is the sword. If you want it, take it. I think maybe he was kind of relieved that it was going to be taken away. There's no other weapon here. He said, whoa, this is the best sword. I'm going to, please give it to me, without the please. Tidnenali, he said, give it to me. So he's very aggressive, David. I mean, again, he's a warrior. He's a soldier. He's someone who, you don't sort of mess with him. And this, again, I think we're getting a bit more of a picture, maybe of a side of David, which we're not so comfortable with. I'm very comfortable with David being the poet, being the quintessential, Bachur Yeshiva, as some people think he was, but him being the warrior and turning around and saying, whoa, this is a great sword, not so sure. Again, this is David HaMelech, a very multifaceted individual. And that's the point I want to make here. Yudala. So David got up and ran away as fast as he could. And where does he go? This is fascinating. He says to himself, listen, wherever I go, I'm running from Yerushalayim, he's going south. Wherever I go, I'm going to be in trouble because the King Shaul has got 3,000 men with him. 3,000 men, crack troops who are going to not only find David, they're going to track him. Everything about this is really not going to look good for David. And David is considered a rebel against the king. A rebel against the king is liable to be put to death. He's considered rebellious. So, and he didn't turn up to the meal. There's all different reasons why the king can now turn around and say, David has a price on it. He doesn't even call him David anymore. He calls him Ben Yishai, as you will see. But what does David decide to do? The only place I can go and hide is in the enemy territory where I know Saul is never going to go there. So he goes to the Plishtim. He takes route, what is it, route 4, route 3, Shalosh, going down south, and he goes, Yova el Achish melech Gat, and he goes to Gat, Kiryat Gat, or Karmei Gat, as they say nowadays. Yud Bet. So the men of Achish said to the king, they said, you must be out of your mind. Hello, Zeh David, melech haaretz. This is David, the king of the land. In other words, the famous David has arrived in our gate. Hello, Lezeh Yanu b'mecholot leimor, and this is the guy that they were singing, they were dancing. The Jewish women. He killed thousands of us. What are you doing, Achish? Why are you letting him in? And David took the conversation. He heard what the guards were saying, and he was very afraid. So he's also got this side of him where, there's bravado, but there's also a sense of a human emotion, very, very human. He was really afraid of Achish, the king. So what did David do? This is such a great story. So he started slurring his speech. He basically made out as if he's crazy. He started dribbling, and he started doing all the crazy things. And he said, of course, he had a beard, so he started dribbling into his beard. And he started he started making out as if he was mad. And he started scribbling or scratching on the doors of the gates. And his saliva was running down his beard. Wow. So Achish said to the men, he saw what state I'm assuming his clothing was, he ripped up his clothing a little bit, maybe rolled in the dust a little bit, so he wasn't looking in great shape. So what did Achish do, the king of the Philistines? He said, Hinei, look, Tiro ish mishtageh, look, the poor guy, didn't say poor guy, but that's what I'm adding. He says, look, he's gone crazy. Lama tavi oto elai, why are you bringing him to me? In other words, if he's crazy, then put him, don't come to me with this complaint. Find a space for him and just put him away. He's clearly not functioning properly. And this is one of my favorite phrases in the Tanakh. Chasam shugoyim oni. Am I lacking lunatics? Right? I mean, how many people have said that in certain institutions in this country? Am I lacking lunatics? You know, sometimes when you go and deal with the bureaucracy. Now you bring another lunatic to drive me crazy? And you want to bring him into my house? Basically, Achish says, I'm not going to tell you to kill him, because look, the poor guy he's behaving like a lunatic. He can't control himself. But at least don't bring him into the palace. I think he might have been thinking about Shimshon. You know, if you bring someone into the palace, next thing you know, the house comes down. So let's keep him away from the king. But, you know, we'll respect him in a way by at least not killing him, putting him, you know, allowing him to be here. And David, his plan worked. He was taking a big risk. Now, listen to this. Here comes the tragedy. David misham After David doesn't say how much time he spent there, he goes to the cave of Adullam, which again I suspect is sort of further south. And everybody, how, again, this is without the internet, how people knew, no Facebook, and they still knew where he was. His whole family knew where he was, and this is so sad. All of a sudden, all the misfits of society thought that David was the man to connect to, right? A bit like the old Robin Hood story. V'chol ish mar nafesh, and everyone who had a bitter soul, anyone who's, you know, was as my grandmother used to call them, verbissene Yidden, right? They had a little bit something. They were not happy people. Vayhi aleim l'sar, and David became like the champion. 400 men. Now this is not a good situation, because not only is David a tzaddik, but he's a tzaddik that understands responsibility. He's got to feed these 400 men. How is he going to find food for these 400 men? Not very clear. What did he do? Vayelech David misham mitzpeh Moav. He went to a place called Mitzpeh Moav, which is more towards Jordan. Vayomer melech Moav, and he found the king of Moab there. And he says, Yetzei na avi v'imi itchem. I want at least my father and my mother to be with you. Ad asher eida, till I know mayaseh li Elohim, what God will do for me. Basically, he wants the king of Moab to look after his parents and his family. And the rabbis fill in the gap over here, because we don't know what happened to them, but they say the king of Moab killed the whole lot. He murdered all of them. Now, why Moab? Because Moab is Ruth. Right? And as far as David was concerned, he came from Moab. His great-grandmother was Ruth. So going to Moab, he thought, was at least a safe haven for his own immediate family. And in the end, they were killed. And again, there's tragedy upon tragedy in the life of David. For a guy who was so close to Hashem, so many things, so many negative things happened to him. And of course, what we learn from David is the way that he deals with it. Sometimes he deals with it in a very significantly, you know, sort of a forceful way. Other times, as you will see when we get into Shmuel Bet and he has rebellions with his kids, he just can't handle it. He's on the floor and he's crying, and unbelievable what goes on. Very emotional man. So at this point, he hopes that the Moabites will look after his family. Pasuk Dalet. Vayanchem et pnei melech Moab, and he took them there. Vayeshu imo kol yimei David ben Sudah, and they were with him as long as David was in the stronghold. David stayed there for a bit, obviously trying to protect himself against whenever Shaul turns up, and his family was there. At this point, very interestingly, there is one of the Nevi'im who we know is very significant, is a guy called Gad Hanavi. There were two prophets, Gad and Natan. And why they are significant, because you'll see in chapter 25, which we'll get to, Mr. Shem, not in too much of a future time, we'll get to chapter 25, Shmuel dies. So the question then is, if Shmuel's dead, who wrote the book of Shmuel? Right? He's dead. He can't write the book when he's dead. So the answer is that these two prophets took over the job from Shmuel, the Rebbe. They became the underwriters, I suppose you would call them. They took over the job and they finished the book of Shmuel Aleph and essentially wrote the book of Shmuel Bet as well. So this is where we get introduced to one of them, Gad Hanavi, Gad the seer, as he's known in English. So he comes to David, and he says to him, "Lo teshei b'Masudah, don't stay here, because this is really, you know, you're a sitting duck." He tried to go to the Plishtim over there in Kiryat Gat, didn't work. He's now gone to the Moabites, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of loyalty, there's not a lot of love between the Moabites and the Jews. Even though you come, essentially, your yichus comes from there. part of your yichus. So it's not gonna save you. Lech ubata lecha eretz Yehuda. Go through the land of Yehuda. So those who've done the trip to Eilat on the bus, 4.5 hours, this is where the territory of David, where he hangs out essentially for the next couple of chapters, En Gedi and beyond. Some of the most unbelievable, amazing parts of Israel. I mean, every part is amazing, but that is truly amazing down there. En Gedi. And Vayelech David v'yavo Yacharet, he came to a place called the Forest of Charet. Not sure what that is. And this is where he decides to hide. This is split screen. David, the whole story of David has been on the right side of the screen. We're now going to the left side of the screen, and we're going to find out what happened with Shaul in the meantime. Vayishma Shaul ki noda David v'anashim asher ito. In the meantime, if the word came back that David had been seen, and his own people knew where he was, then Shaul also heard. There are people, unfortunately, for a few shekels will give away secrets. Unfortunately, this is something we have to live with. But Shaul Yoshe Begiva, he's dwelling in his palace on the hill where he lives, Givat Shaul, and Tachat HaEshel, he's under some sort of tree. They call it a tamarisk tree. I'm not sure what that is. Barama, and he's always holding his spear. Seemingly, this is what the king does. And all his servants are standing there. So what's going to be? It's a great story. And so Saul says to his servants, he says, Shiruna, B'nai Yemini, oh Benjamin. Remember, he's from the tribe of Benjamin. So he surrounded himself, his loyal people are from the tribe of Benjamin. He says, listen, O men of Benjamin, Gam lekolechem yitain ben Yishai sadot ukramim. Has Ben Yishai, doesn't even call him David anymore. He says, has the son of Yishai given you fields and orchards or whatever? Lekolechem yasim sarei lefim l'sarema. Has he promised you high positions in his government? You'll become officers. And of course, what Saul is saying is that, why didn't you tell me where David was? If you knew where he was, why didn't you let me know? And look at this, and Saul has become very suspicious. He's part of his problem, or part of his illness, was this total suspicion of everything, conspiracy going on around him the whole time. And it's very sad, because this is a great man. This is a very big tzaddik, and the mind plays terrible games. And we don't have to go very far today to see examples of all of this. Posachet ki kashartem kulachem alai. He accused all of his followers of being in league against him. I know my son made a covenant. Jonathan and David made a covenant, and nobody told me about it. And nobody revealed it. Chole is an interesting word. Normally means nobody is unwell. Just want to see here what the Matsuda says. Just one second. Nobody felt bad for me. Chole is this idea of chole, being unwell. But Saul is in his speech saying, none of you felt bad that you would reveal to me that Jonathan made a pact with David. Alive, a golet doesn't he? You let me know. You didn't let me know. And of course, what happened was that he suspected that even Jonathan might have made a trap for his father. In other words, basically, to quote the expression that we use nowadays, Saul was losing it big time. Tet, Vayan Doeg domina. Here comes something which is shocking. Those who are into the Chofetz Chaim books, and the big tzaddik Chofetz Chaim died in 1933. It's pretty amazing that it's funny, because my daughter in school, they never told anything about the rabbi, who they were, where they came from. So she thought Rashi and the Chofetz Chaim were contemporary. And I had to explain to her, no, they were about 800 years apart. She was pretty shocked by that. But the Chofetz Chaim died in 1933. I actually had a teacher in London who was one of his students, which does, link you to a whole pre-war generation of the Chofetz Chaim. And also, right, and people still, it's amazing that the people around, not so much now, but sort of go back 20 years, people around who knew him personally. Really if you haven't seen it, there is a film of the Aguda conference in Vienna, 1923, and the Chofetz Chaim was there. He's sort of trundling along with his Polish cap, looks very Polish, being accompanied, I think, by Leo Jung, who's a very well-known rabbi in New York. And they were in Vienna in 23 discussing Jewish issues. A very interesting film that they made, which they found not so long ago. Anyway, so the Chavetz Chaim, one of his big campaigns in life was to try and make people aware of the damage of Lashon Hara. We know that this is one of the things that we try to avoid. It's difficult, and Doeg becomes the quintessential Baal Lashon Hara. Very, very difficult. As I said, he was a great scholar, but unfortunately his character had what we can only call defect, very big defect, as you'll see here. Pasuk 10. Vayan Doeg Edomi, v'hu nitzav aladei Shaul. Now he was in charge of the servants. What did he say? Vayomar, and he said, Har'iti et ben Yishai. He spills the beans. I saw David. Bon Novem, when I was in Nov, he came. El Achimelech ben Achitub to Achimelech. Now the problem is that as far as Saul is concerned, if you help the fugitive, you become tarred with the same brush. And as far as that means, for Saul means that the Kohanim all harbored the fugitive, they all deserve to be put to death. This is shocking, absolutely shocking. Pasuk Yud. Vayishalo b'Shem, and when David was there, he used the special connector, the hotline to God, the Urim V'Tumim as they were known. But Seder Natan Lo, and Yachimelech gave him food. Eit Cherev Goliath Plishti Natan Lo, even gave him a sword, the sword of Goliath. Vayishlach HaMelech likrot Achimelech ben Achitub HaKohen. So the king sent a proclamation to Achimelech, Kumaher, you got to come and see me. Kol Beit Aviv HaKohanim Asher Benov, to all of the priests also had to come. Vayavo Kulam Ala Melech, and of course you don't say no to the king, you come. So again, this is revealing that as much as people thought the king had lost the plot, the reality was that for the people, he was still the king. His word was absolutely sacrosanct, and you don't ignore a summons from the king. Look at this story. It's so sad. Vayomer Shaul Shmana ben Achitub. Doesn't call him by his first name. The son of Achitub, listen. Vayomer Hineni Adoni, here I am, my master. In other words, obviously Achimelech had no clue what was coming. Vayomer elav Shaul lama kashatem alai. Why did you make a rebellion, Achimelech? Atau ben Yishai, you with ben Yishai, you with David. Wow. V'tidcha lo lechem, you gave him bread, v'cherev, and a sword. V'shalo be'elohim, and you helped him to ask Hashem what to do next. This famous hotline that they had. Look, and to be a trap for me. Why did you do this, Achimelech? Vayan Achimelech et hamelech vayomar. Achimelech respond. Mi b'chol avadecha keDavid Ne'eman. Saul, you're not only are you confusing me, I can't believe what you just said. Who is more faithful in your entourage than David? The Chatan HaMelech, and he's your son-in-law, for goodness sake. Right? You know, I know sometimes the relationship between parents-in-law and the children-in-law can be challenging, but you don't, he's your son-in-law, for goodness sake. V'sal mishmatecha, and I know that he listens to you to do your service, and he's honored. And today, did I inquire of God? In other words, what he's basically trying to say is that I didn't do anything wrong. Al Yosem HaMelech Ba'avdo Davar B'chol Beit Avi Ki Lo Yodav Decha B'chol Zot. I did, don't start accusing me of things which I am not guilty of, because I have not done anything against you, Davar Katan or Gadol, whether it's small or big. Basically, Achimelech says, I am loyal to the king. What are you saying, Shaul? Vayomer HaMelech Mot Tamut Achimelech. It's the saddest pasuk in the book of Shmuel. He says, Achimelech, you are to be put to death. Wow. And of course, the king can do this. There's a rule called Mored B'Malchut. The king is the chief executioner of the Jewish people. If he decides someone is to die, that's it. That's why Shmuel says to the people back in chapter 8, you want a king? Remember, he can put you to death at the drop of a hat, literally. So it's not so straightforward, but this was so terrible. Not only you, says Shmuel, says Saul, Ata v'chol beit avicha, the whole household. He put the whole city to death. Unbelievable. Vayoma hamelech l'ratzim anitzavim elav sobu v'amitu kohenei Hashem. So he told his servants to kill all the priests. They were all lined up there. Kigam yadam im David, because they're also guilty of giving a hand to David. Ki yadu ki boreachu, because they knew that he was running away. V'lo golu et azni, and they didn't let me know. V'lo avu avdei hamelech lishloch yadam. They refused to obey orders. So interesting. I remember, I'm not sure if this chapter came up in the discussion of the Gush Katif when they took the people out. But many of the Frum boys that were commissioned to do it, of the soldiers, refused to do it, right? And again, look at the precedent over here. This is an order which they cannot fulfill. And there's a precedent in the story here in Tanakh. They turned around to Shaul and they said, we can't do this. How can we kill these priests of God? Here comes the terrible thing. Vayoma hamelech l'doeg. He was written with an aleph. Now he's written with a yud. Doeg comes from the expression dayag, which means a fisherman. He is caught in his own trap, or as Shakespeare says, hoist with his own petard. He's blown up with his own bomb, literally, because he's the one who revealed spilled the beans. He's now got to carry out the death sentence because he warned. It's a halacha that the person, the witness, is the one. He's got to be so convinced to be able to testify, to the point where he has got to be prepared to kill the person if it's a capital situation. So the king says to Doeg, Sovata pagah b'kohanim, you kill the priest. So all of this turning around, right? Again, almost to suggest that to me it's like everyone else has turned their back on the king, right? There is something going on here that the only one who's turning towards the king, where everybody else has turned away from the king because they really cannot tolerate this particular command. As I said at the beginning, I was only following orders, but they cannot stand it. But here, Doeg is what he's going to say if he's ever accused of this, and later on, David does accuse him of it. You'll see, if you get to Shmuel at the beginning, you'll see there's a whole connection there with Doeg. We'll see Mitzvah Hashem. So listen to this. Vayisov Doeg Edomi, vayifgahu b'kohanim, he struck the priest, vayomed bayomahu, shmonim v'chamisha ish, 85 men. Unbelievable. No seifo, but they were wearing their ephod, their special cloaks, and he killed them all. And not only that, the rest of the city. This goes back, reminds you of the story of Shechem, that when the two sons of Yaakov went to Shechem and the king had molested and raped Dinah, the whole city became liable and the whole city was put to death. And this became the standard here as well. And it's the same language that Shaul did not do. Remember the whole thing with Amalek, right? That he left too many of them alive, and that was part of the problem of what Shaul didn't do. And here, unfortunately, it became, as they say, sometimes he lost his perspective, when to be cruel, when to be kind, and in this case, he was terribly cruel. Even the animal. One son of Achimelech's Savine, Ushamo Evyatar, one of my favorite names in the Bible. We have a cousin. You have a cousin called Evyatar. Wonderful. Vayivrach acharei David, and he ran to tell David, because in the end of the day, this is a terrible, terrible event. Vayugad Evyatar leDavid ki harag Shaul et kohenei Hashem, told David what happened. David cannot believe it, and of course, David is a tzaddik, and immediately he takes the blame upon himself. Vayomer David leVyatar yadati bayomahu ki sham Doeg Edomi. I knew there was going to be trouble because Doeg was there. I saw him. Ki hagei yagid l'Shaul. I knew he was going to tell Shaul. Obviously, Doeg had a reputation. He can't keep a secret. Anochi saboti b'chol nefesh beit avicha. And I am the one responsible for the death of your whole mishpucha. How terrible. And David, and in fact, the rabbis say not only David, but even Yonatan was responsible, because he could have given him food and he wouldn't have to go to the city of priests. He would never have had to go there because he would have got food from the palace from Yonatan. So David took upon himself the responsibility, and he is devastated. He says, Shava iti al tirad, Evyatar, stay with me. Ki atashay yivakesh nafshi yivaket nafshech. Whoever wants to kill me will want to kill you. In other words, we're both in it up to our necks. Ki mishmeret atayim adi, but you will be safe with me. And That's the end of the story. It is so shocking. I just want to read to you a little bit of what Rav Ariel says, because it is truly a shocking story. He says that, and he points out that Doeg is such a contradiction. He's in the town coming to learn. He's gone to the Achikala. He's gone to the learning experience, right? He's there to study. So seemingly, he obviously has that inclination towards Torah. On the other hand, he says, Me'idoch mutziyeret tmunat hateva. But at the same time, who carries out the orders? Doeg, nobody else. He's the only one with the sword who goes and does what Shaul tells him to do. What is so interesting, and we'll see this later on, is that Shaul is not absolutely criticized for it, because halachically, al pi halacha, Shaul was able to do. It wasn't a how should we say? It wasn't a great moral decision that Shaul had made, but it was certainly halachically within the parameters of what he was allowed to say, that this sentence was carried out from Shaul's point of view, because a rebel of the king is liable for death. However, the fact that the person who carried it out, Doeg, and again put him on the pedestal in the court, and he would say, "I was only carrying out orders," is that an excuse for Doeg? The answer has to be no, because the other people, and what's the proof? The other people said no to the king, and to say no to the king was not an easy thing to do. But they said, "We can't do this. This is not right." I know halachically it's correct. You can argue that, but morally, Ribono Shel Olam, this is a terrible, terrible thing that we're being asked to do. And again, what Rav Ariel goes on, he brings here very, very interesting sources, and he says there is a comparison. We're going to talk about someone called Achitophel. Achitophel was the grandfather, if I'm not mistaken, of Bathsheba, who ends up marrying David, or David marrying her. And Achitophel was a man who, unfortunately, again, had a very big issue with David, did not like him, joined in with the rebellion of Avshalom against his father, against David. David's son rebelled. Achitophel was there as the advisor. Apparently he was a very smart man. Unfortunately, he gave the wrong advice, and when the rebellion failed, Achitophel committed suicide. Terrible thing. So these are characters which, again, not so well known, but we need to know about them. The Jewish world has always been very, very interesting. There's the good guys, and let's put it this way, the not so good guys, right? There's always people are always going to have merits. Doeg, you're going to argue to me and say, well, look, at least he was the head of Sanhedrin, for goodness sake. Yeah, he was good with the sword. He was also good with, obviously, he could give a good shear, as they say. But at the same time, in terms of his personality and that he was prepared to go and carry out such a terrible death sentence, that is really, really shocking. And what we're going to see from here on, and again, you have this page, I sent it out, just if you can work your way through it a little bit. I've written about it in the book. If you have the book also, I spoke about this in that chapter, on chapter 21, 22. It's really, really difficult. Doeg presents to us sort of the nemesis, or as one of my teachers used to call it, the nemesis of David. He's sort of the other side, the other end of the scale. This is a really shocking story. If you've never seen this story before, I'm sorry, I may have spoiled your day. I apologize, but Gam Terahi, it's also Torah. We need to know it. Yeah.
So, did Shaul ever get punished?
Seemingly, some say when he died, the hero's death at the end, because remember he's killed by the Pelishtim in the end with his 3 sons. Part of that death sentence on him specifically was because of this. However, most people say no. This, from the point of view of the king, was again, legally he cannot be punished. Morally, we've got a massive problem. And what we have to say is that there are dilemmas like this. The king with David and Bathsheba, legally he's got a million excuses for what he did, sending Uriah to the front line. Morally, he knows that he was wrong. And if you look into Tehillim, you'll see there when David talks about it, he says, Chatati Aviti, he does like on Yom Kippur, he's doing this for the rest of his life, because he knows morally he was wrong. And there is going to be always this kind of dichotomy between what is legally and what is morally acceptable. And we're going to have to deal with that, have to come to terms.
It's legally acceptable.
Well, again, the halacha was already established. This is what Shmuel warned the Jews. If you have a king, he can literally snap his fingers and you are toast. Literally.
No, but they they were Jews. So it's like
It doesn't matter. This is the rule of law. You know, I mean, the police stop you. You're doing 120 on an 80 kilometer, and you say, "Well, we're all Jews." I don't think the police was going to have a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Just to make a comparison. You know, we are all Jews, but we've also got laws to observe. But it is shocking. I mean, this is extreme. We'll see Mitzvah Hashem as we go through the next few chapters. David is running. Everyone's running. Shaul is running. David is running. We're all running. And it's speeding up to the point where, you know, we need to get to the point where David takes over and is absolutely established as the king. At the moment, he is you say in Yiddish, Gehakt Tzoros, he's really in big trouble over here. And we'll see how it goes. We'll see what happens. Mitzvah Hashem, chapter 23, to be continued. I hope, as I said, I hope it didn't spoil your day, but it's such a shocking story. It's really quite frightening. Please.
On his deathbed, he gave Shlomo instructions on the kills. Was Doeg one of the people?
No, Doeg's not. No. The people he does talk about are pretty shocking. He talks about, for instance, Yoav. Yoav was his cousin, and he says, make sure Yoav does not meet his next birthday. That's basically what he says. It's like an episode out of the Sopranos, right? You know what I'm talking about. It's really scary. David was a very great tzaddik, but also feet on the ground. He was a politician, as they all were. Doesn't surprise us living in Israel, but it does surprise us when we put David into a category which is not realistic. He is a tzaddik. He's very close to God, but he's also very, very powerful. And when he turns up at the priest, you know, their knees start knocking. What's he doing? He's the most scary man in the country. Very interesting story. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Appreciate it. Thank you. Erev Tov. Erev Tov. Happy Yom Yerushalayim. We'll talk about David HaMelech.